She inherited an old cafe. Everyone laughed at her and called her crazy. But what happened next changed the fate of an entire community forever. Maya Johnson stood in front of the broken windows of the old Grandma's Embrace Cafe and couldn't believe her eyes. She had returned to her hometown of Millbrook after her grandmother's funeral, expecting nothing more than painful memories and a quick estate settlement. But the lawyer's words still echoed in her head. Your grandmother left you the cafe, all of it, for one symbolic dollar. The building looked like it hadn't seen life in years. Paint peeled from the walls like old skin. The wooden sign hung crooked, barely clinging to rusty chains. Weeds grew through cracks in the sidewalk, reaching toward broken street lamps. Windows were boarded up or shattered. This was her inheritance. Maya pulled out the old photograph her grandmother had kept on her nightstand. It showed the same building 30 years ago, vibrant, alive, packed with smiling customers. The contrast made her heart ache. Girl, you've lost your mind if you think you can make something out of that dump, laughed Mrs. Peterson from across the street. Other neighbors gathered, shaking their heads in pity. Some took pictures with their phones, as if Maya's presence was entertainment. That place has been cursed for 5 years, muttered old Mr. Williams, spitting tobacco juice into a coffee can. 3 businesses failed there. Restaurant, then a dry cleaner, then some fancy tea shop. All went belly up within 6 months. You should just sell it and move on back to whatever big city you came from. Maya had indeed come from Chicago, where she'd spent 10 years working as a marketing manager for a consulting firm. Good salary, nice apartment, predictable life. But something had always felt missing. When her grandmother passed, Maya realized what that something was, purpose. But standing here now, surrounded by skeptical faces and staring at the ruins of her inheritance, that purpose felt more like foolishness. Maya pulled out her keys and approached the front door. The lock was rusted, but it still turned. The door creaked open like a haunted house in a horror movie. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight streaming through broken boards. The air smelled of mold, abandonment, and forgotten dreams. But Maya felt something different. Standing there, she remembered her grandmother's stories about the cafe's golden days, how it was the heart of the community, how people came not just for coffee, but for warmth, friendship, and hope. How her grandmother had fed struggling families during the recession, never asking for payment. Grandma always said this place had magic, Maya whispered to herself, running her fingers along the old counter. Underneath years of grime, she could feel the smooth wood her grandmother had polished with love every single day. Across the street, Marcus Bennett watched from behind the spotless windows of his modern coffee chain, Elite Brew. His establishment gleamed with chrome fixtures, expensive Italian espresso machines, and minimalist decor that screamed exclusivity. His eyes narrowed as he observed the young black woman examining the old building. He had been waiting for years to buy that property and expand his empire. Now this complication had appeared. Marcus straightened his expensive tie and checked his Rolex. His lawyer had assured him the property would go up for auction after the old woman died. No one had mentioned an heir, especially not one who looked like she might actually be stupid enough to try running a business there. Marcus walked outside, his leather shoes clicking against the pristine sidewalk. His smile was cold and calculating, the kind he'd perfected in 20 years of crushing small competitors. You must be the new owner, he said, extending a manicured hand. Marcus Bennett. I own the successful business across the street. Maya shook his hand cautiously. Something about his smile didn't reach his eyes. His grip was too firm, too aggressive for a friendly introduction. I heard about your situation, Marcus continued, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Look, I'm a reasonable businessman. I understand you're probably overwhelmed right now, dealing with grief and inheritance complications. I'll make you a generous offer. $5,000 cash right now. You can walk away from this headache and get on with your life. Maya looked at the cafe, then back at Marcus. Even in its current state, the building had to be worth far more than $5,000. The land alone was valuable, sitting on the main commercial strip. It's not for sale, she said quietly. Marcus's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. I understand attachment to family property. I really do. But be realistic. This building needs hundreds of thousands in repairs. The neighborhood has changed. People have different expectations now. 15,000. Final offer. Trust me, you don't want the stress of trying to run a business here. This neighborhood can be challenging for people like you. The way he said people like you made Maya's blood run cold. She'd heard that tone before, in Chicago boardrooms, at networking events, in 1,000 small interactions that reminded her she would always be seen as different, as other, as not quite belonging. But instead of the usual shrinking feeling, Maya felt her grandmother's strength flowing through her veins. Rosa Johnson had built something beautiful from nothing. She'd faced down racism, sexism, and economic hardship with grace and determination. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Bennett. But like I said, it's not for sale. Marcus's face darkened. The friendly mask slipped completely, revealing something ugly underneath. You'll regret this decision, Miss Johnson. Mark my words. This isn't Chicago. Things work differently here. Some dreams are too big for some people. He turned and walked back to his pristine coffee shop, already pulling out his phone to make calls. As Marcus walked back to his spotless coffee shop, Maya felt the weight of the challenge ahead. But she also felt something else, determination burning like fire in her chest. She had left a six-figure job to be here. She wasn't about to be intimidated by some small-town bully. That evening, Maya sat in her grandmother's old apartment above the cafe, going through boxes of memories. The apartment was small but filled with love, family photos covering every surface, handmade quilts on the furniture, the lingering scent of her grandmother's lavender soap. In the corner, she found a trunk filled with cafe memorabilia. Photos showed the cafe in its prime, packed with smiling faces, families celebrating birthdays, young couples on first dates, business meetings over coffee and pie. Her grandmother behind the counter, arms wide open, welcoming everyone regardless of their color or class. She always said this place was magic, Maya whispered to herself, touching a photograph of her grandmother serving coffee to a mixed-race couple in 1995. Maybe it's time to bring that magic back. But as she dug deeper into the trunk, she found something troubling. A folder marked "Legal Issues" contained newspaper clippings about protests and threats the cafe had faced in the 1990s. Someone had tried to burn it down in 1997. Windows had been broken multiple times. Her grandmother had received death threats for serving the wrong kind of people. One letter made Maya's hands shake. Rosa, you need to learn your place. This town doesn't need your kind stirring up trouble. Close down or face the consequences. A concerned citizen. Maya realized her grandmother had fought this same battle 30 years ago, and somehow she had won. The cafe had thrived for decades despite the hatred. If Rosa Johnson could do it then, Maya Johnson could do it now. The next morning, Maya arrived early to assess the full scope of the damage. In daylight, the inside was even worse than she remembered. Tables and chairs were broken and scattered like a tornado had swept through. The kitchen equipment was ancient and covered in rust and grime. Water stains marked the ceiling where the roof had leaked for years. The floor was warped and stained. The walls were covered in graffiti and mold. The electrical system looked like a fire hazard. Maya started making a mental list of everything that needed repair or replacement. The number was overwhelming. But in the corner, behind an overturned booth, she found something that made her heart skip. Her grandmother's old recipe book, wrapped in plastic and hidden in a secret drawer she remembered from childhood visits. The pages were yellowed but perfectly preserved. Grandma's famous sweet potato pie, community soup that heals hearts, coffee blend that brings people together. Each recipe had notes in her grandmother's careful handwriting. Not just ingredients and instructions, but stories. Mrs. Williams loves extra cinnamon in his coffee, helps with his arthritis. Sarah Chen's family is vegetarian. Remember the special soup recipe for them. Tommy Rodriguez has diabetes. Use sugar substitute in his pie. Those aren't just recipes, Maya realized, tears streaming down her cheeks. They're love letters to this community. As she read, she heard voices outside. Through the grimy window, she saw Marcus talking to a group of men in expensive suits. His lawyer, a city councilman she recognized, and two other men she didn't know. They kept pointing at her building and shaking their heads dismissively. One of them made a phone call while looking directly at her through the window. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever Marcus was planning, it wasn't going to be straightforward business competition. This felt like a coordinated campaign. That afternoon, she visited Murphy's hardware store to price renovation supplies. The owner, Joe Murphy, was a middle-aged Irishman with calloused hands and skeptical eyes. He looked her up and down like she was speaking a foreign language when she asked about contractor prices. "You sure you want to take on that project, miss? That building's got problems." "Big problems," Joe said, crossing his arms. "What kind of problems?" Maya asked. Joe glanced around his empty store nervously. "Well, I heard there might be structural issues, foundation problems, possible asbestos. You might want to have it inspected real careful like before you sink any money into it." Ikum, Maya sensed there was more to the story, but Joe wouldn't meet her eyes. "Who told you about these problems?" "Just around. You know how word gets around in a small town." Joe suddenly became very busy organizing already organized screws. "Maybe you should talk to Marcus Bennett. He knows the building's history better than anyone." As Maya left the store, she noticed Marcus's silver BMW parked across the street. He was sitting inside, watching her every move. When their eyes met through the windshield, he smiled that cold smile and gave her a little wave. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Smart girls know when to quit. Stupid ones learn the hard way. Her hands trembling with anger and fear, Maya deleted the message and walked back toward the cafe. But instead of feeling defeated, she felt more determined than ever. Her grandmother hadn't backed down from threats, and neither would she. Back at the cafe, Maya rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She started by clearing out the debris, piece by piece. Each broken chair, each shattered glass, each moldy board told a story of neglect and abandonment. But underneath it all, she could see the bones of something beautiful. The original hardwood floors were solid beneath the water damage. The tin ceiling, though tarnished, was intact and stunning. The brick walls, once cleaned, would be gorgeous. The large windows, once replaced, would flood the space with natural light. As the sun set, painting the cafe in golden light streaming through the broken boards, Maya made a promise to her grandmother's memory. "I'm going to bring you back to life, no matter what it takes. This community needs a place to come together, and I'm going to give it to them." She didn't notice the figure in the shadows across the street, taking photos of her working alone in the empty building. Marcus Bennett was already planning his next move, and it would be more aggressive than a simple buyout offer. The first sign of sabotage came at dawn. Maya arrived to find her newly repaired front door hanging off its hinges, wood splintered around the lock. Someone had spray-painted "Go Home" across the freshly cleaned windows in dripping red letters. Her heart sank like a stone, but her resolve only grew stronger. "Cowards," she muttered, grabbing cleaning supplies from her car. "If they think this will stop me, they don't know who they're dealing with." As she scrubbed the hateful graffiti, Maya noticed something else. Her grandmother's memorial flowers, which she'd placed by the front door, had been trampled and scattered. This wasn't just about business competition anymore. This was personal. An elderly black woman approached slowly, using a walking cane. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and moved with the careful dignity of someone who had seen too much hatred in her lifetime. "Child, you shouldn't be out here cleaning this mess alone," the woman said, her voice carrying the musical cadence of the Old South. "I'm Evelyn Johnson. I live next door in the Blue House. I knew your grandmother well. Rosa was like a sister to me." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Did you really know her?" "I mean, recently." "Honey, your grandma saved my family during the hard times. When my husband lost his job at the factory and we couldn't afford groceries, she'd slip us free meals and never made us feel like charity cases. When my grandson needed school supplies, she'd accidentally order too much inventory and give us the extras. She was an angel in an apron." Mrs. Johnson looked at the vandalized cafe with sadness and righteous anger. "Whoever did this doesn't represent the real heart of this community. Some of us still remember what this place meant, what your grandmother meant. May, will you help me clean this up?" Maya asked hopefully. "I understand if you don't want to get involved. It might not be safe." "Child, I'm 78 years old. I lived through Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, and 40 years of marriage to a man who snored like a freight train. You think I'm afraid of some cowardly spray paint?" Mrs. Johnson smiled fiercely. "I may be old, but I can still hold a scrub brush." and I know where to get the good cleaning supplies. As they worked together, scrubbing away the hatred word by word, Maya felt less alone for the first time since arriving in Millbrook. But their peaceful moment was shattered when Marcus appeared with a man in a crisp uniform. "Miss Johnson," Marcus called out with exaggerated concern, "I'm so sorry about this vandalism. Terrible thing, but I'm also worried about public safety. I've had to call in Inspector Rodriguez to make sure this building meets current health codes before you put the community at risk." Inspector Rodriguez looked deeply uncomfortable, but proceeded to examine the cafe with exaggerated scrutiny. He took notes about every small issue: a loose floorboard, a stained ceiling tile, outdated electrical outlets, the absence of modern fire suppression systems. Maya watched as the inspector photographed things that weren't even problems, like the vintage tin ceiling and original brick walls. This wasn't a real inspection. This was a hit job. "I'm sorry, miss, but I'll need to see permits for all renovation work," Rodriguez said apologetically, avoiding her eyes. "And there are several violations that need immediate attention before this property can be occupied for commercial purposes." Maya's heart sank as the inspector handed her a citation list 3 pages long. Each item would cost money she didn't have and time she couldn't spare. Structural engineer reports, environmental assessments, electrical system overhaul, plumbing upgrades, accessibility modifications. As soon as Marcus and Rodriguez left, Mrs. Johnson shook her head sadly. "That man Bennett's got his fingers in everything. Rodriguez is actually a good man. He goes to my church, but he's got 3 kids and a mortgage. Can't blame him for following orders when his job's on the line." "What am I supposed to do?" Maya asked, feeling the weight of impossibility crushing down on her. "I've got maybe $20,000 saved. This list would cost 10 times that much." "You fight, child. That's what your grandmother would do. Rosa didn't have money either when she started. She had something better. She had heart. And you don't fight alone." Mrs. Johnson pulled out her phone and started making calls. "Maria, it's Evelyn. Remember what Rosa did for your family when Manuel was in the hospital? Well, her granddaughter needs our help now." That evening, Maya sat in the cafe reading her grandmother's journal by flashlight. The electricity had been mysteriously cut off that afternoon, despite her having paid the deposit. One entry caught her attention. March 15th, 1997. "They tried to burn us down last night. Tommy and I spent all night putting out the fire and cleaning up the damage. I could pack up and leave. Go somewhere easier. But this community needs a place where everyone is welcome. When they tried to shut us down in 1987 with their protests and boycotts, I learned that standing up to bullies isn't about being fearless. It's about being more afraid of giving up than of fighting. Tomorrow I'm going to bake extra pies and give them away free. Love always wins if you refuse to let hate win." Maya closed the journal and looked around the partially cleaned cafe, illuminated by candles Mrs. Johnson had brought over. Tomorrow she would start tackling that violations list, one item at a time, one day at a time, one small victory at a time. Outside, Marcus watched from his coffee shop as candlelight flickered in the old cafe windows. His jaw tightened with frustration. The girl was proving more stubborn than he had anticipated. The anonymous threats, the vandalism, the bogus inspection, none of it had worked. It was time to escalate his tactics significantly. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number from his contacts. "Jackson, it's Marcus Bennett. I need you and your boys to pay a visit to that old cafe tomorrow night, the one across from my shop. Nothing too serious, just enough to send a clear message that some people don't belong here." The voice on the other end chuckled darkly. "Consider it done, boss. What kind of message you want us to send exactly?" Marcus smiled coldly. "The permanent kind." Maya worked 18-hour days, tackling repairs with fierce determination. She learned to fix plumbing from YouTube videos, painted walls until her arms ached, and slowly transformed the cafe from a disaster zone into something resembling hope. But every step forward seemed to trigger 2 steps back. When she fixed the front window, someone broke the back door. When she installed new lighting, the electrical box mysteriously short-circuited. When she painted the exterior, someone threw eggs at it the same night. "This is getting ridiculous," Maya told Mrs. Johnson as they cleaned egg residue for the 3rd time. "It's like someone's watching my every move." "Someone is," Mrs. Johnson replied grimly. That Bennett boy's got eyes everywhere. But don't you worry, child. Word's getting around about what's happening here. Not everyone in this town is willing to stand by and watch bullying. As if summoned by her words, a young Hispanic man approached carrying a toolbox. He was about Maya's age with calloused hands and honest eyes. "Excuse me, miss. I'm Carlos Martinez. I run a small construction crew, and I heard you might need some help." Maya looked at him suspiciously. After weeks of sabotage, she had learned to be cautious. "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Johnson mentioned it to my mother at church. Look, I know what Bennett's been doing to you. It's not right. My crew and we'd like to help. No charge." "Why would you do that?" Maya asked, her voice cracking with emotion. Carlos smiled. "Because your grandmother helped my family when we first moved here. She was the first person to give my father work when no one else would hire him. We owe her." That afternoon, Carlos and his crew arrived with supplies and equipment. For the first time in weeks, Maya felt hope returning. They worked together, repairing the major structural issues on the inspector's list. But their progress didn't go unnoticed. That evening, as Carlos was loading his truck, three men emerged from the shadows. They were large, intimidating figures with gang tattoos and cold eyes. "You boys need to find somewhere else to work," the leader said menacingly. "This building ain't safe for honest contractors." Carlos stood his ground. "We're not looking for trouble, but we're not running either." The thug smiled coldly and pulled out a baseball bat. "Maybe you didn't hear me clearly." Before anyone could react, Mrs. Johnson appeared on her porch with a shotgun. "You boys need to move along before I call my nephew at the police station." The thugs hesitated, then retreated into the shadows. But their message was clear. The stakes were rising. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She sat in the cafe, surrounded by the day's progress, but feeling more threatened than ever. She was putting good people in danger. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she should just sell and walk away. But then she opened her grandmother's recipe book and found a note tucked between the pages. "Maya, baby girl, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're facing your first real fight. Remember, courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. This cafe is more than a building. It's hope, and hope is worth fighting for." Maya wiped away her tears and made a decision. Tomorrow she would file for her business license and set an opening date. Whatever Marcus threw at her next, she would be ready. Opening day arrived like a storm. Maya had worked for 3 months to transform the cafe into something beautiful. The walls gleamed with fresh paint, new windows sparkled in the sunlight, and the aroma of her grandmother's coffee blend filled the air. But as dawn broke, Maya discovered her worst nightmare. The cafe had been completely vandalized overnight. Tables were overturned and broken. The newly installed espresso machine was smashed beyond repair. Obscene graffiti covered the walls. The front windows were shattered again. Maya stood in the doorway, surveying the destruction, and felt her heart breaking. 3 months of work, all her savings, gone. "No, no, no," she whispered, falling to her knees among the debris. But then she heard footsteps. Mrs. Johnson appeared with a broom. Then Carlos arrived with his crew. Then Maria from the corner market. Then James, the retired teacher. Then dozens of community members Maya had never even met. "What are you all doing here?" Maya asked through her tears. "We're opening this cafe," Mrs. Johnson said firmly. "Today, just like you planned. But look at this mess. It's destroyed. I don't have money to fix it again." "Child, sometimes you don't need money. You need community." For the next 6 hours, the entire neighborhood worked together. They cleaned, repaired, painted, and improvised. Someone donated folding chairs. Another person brought card tables. The corner market contributed pastries. Carlos fixed the espresso machine with spare parts. But the real miracle happened at noon. As Maya was setting up the coffee station, she saw Marcus across the street directing the same 3 thugs who had threatened Carlos. They were heading toward the cafe with baseball bats, ready to destroy everything again. "Enough!" Maya shouted, marching outside to confront them. "I know you're behind all this, Marcus." Marcus stepped forward with a cruel smile. "Prove it, girl. Prove I had anything to do with your unfortunate setbacks." The entire crowd gathered behind Maya. Mrs. Johnson stood beside her. Carlos flanked her other side. Dozens of community members formed a protective circle. You want to know what I can prove? Maya's voice rang out across the street. I can prove that this community is stronger than your hatred. I can prove that love builds more than money ever could. And I can prove that my grandmother's dream won't die because some small, scared man can't stand seeing others succeed. Marcus's face turned red with rage. You people don't belong here. This is a respectable neighborhood. No, said a voice from the crowd. It was Inspector Rodriguez, the health inspector. People like you don't belong here. I've been documenting everything you've done to this young woman. The bribes, the threats, the property damage. It's all on record. Behind Rodriguez stood 3 police officers. Marcus's thugs dropped their weapons and scattered. Marcus himself backed toward his coffee shop, suddenly realizing how outnumbered he was. This isn't over, he snarled. Yes, it is, Maya said quietly, because we're opening this cafe right now, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. People rushed into the cafe, filling every improvised seat. Maya served her grandmother's coffee blend from paper cups, but nobody minded. The atmosphere was electric with triumph and community spirit. Mrs. Johnson stood up and tapped her spoon against her cup. I'd like to say something, if I may. The room fell quiet. 40 years ago, this cafe was the heart of our community. It's where we celebrated births, mourned losses, and came together during hard times. When it closed, we lost something precious. Today, thanks to Maya's courage, we got it back. The crowd applauded again. Maya felt overwhelmed by emotion. This was more than she had ever dreamed possible. But the real surprise came when Inspector Rodriguez approached her with an official-looking document. Miss Johnson, after my thorough re-inspection this morning, I'm pleased to inform you that this establishment exceeds all health and safety requirements. You're fully licensed to operate. He smiled warmly. I'm also required to inform you that we'll be investigating Marcus Bennett for harassment, bribery, and interference with a legitimate business. Maya's eyes widened. What does that mean? It means his coffee shop is going to face some very serious scrutiny, and his reputation in this community is finished. As if to prove his point, a steady stream of customers began leaving Marcus's elite brew and crossing the street to Grandma's embrace. By evening, his store was nearly empty while Maya's cafe overflowed with celebration. Carlos pulled Maya aside. My mother wanted me to give you this. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note. From the Martinez family and 20 other families who remember your grandmother's kindness. For equipment and supplies. Welcome home. Maya burst into tears. Happy tears this time. As the celebration continued into the evening, Maya stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. Across the street, Marcus stood alone in his empty coffee shop, staring at the thriving cafe with defeat in his eyes. Maya felt a moment of pity for him. Then she turned back to her grandmother's cafe, filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of community. This was what victory looked like. Not the destruction of an enemy, but the building of something beautiful. Mrs. Johnson joined her on the sidewalk. Your grandmother would be so proud, child. I can feel her here, Maya whispered. In every smile, every laugh, every person who chose to stand up instead of look away. That's the real magic of this place, Mrs. Johnson said. It doesn't just serve food and coffee, it serves hope. As the evening wound down and the last customers reluctantly headed home, Maya stood alone in her cafe for the first time since opening day. But she didn't feel alone. She felt connected to something larger than herself, to her grandmother's legacy, to her community's strength, and to the power of refusing to give up. 6 months later, Maya stood behind the counter of Grandma's Embrace, watching the morning rush with satisfaction. The cafe had become exactly what her grandmother had envisioned, a place where everyone felt welcome. The regulars knew each other's names and stories. Mrs. Johnson held her knitting circle every Tuesday. Carlos and his crew stopped by for lunch daily. Students from the local high school did homework at corner tables. Young parents brought their children for story time on weekends. But the most remarkable transformation was in the community itself. Maya's successful stand against Marcus Bennett had inspired others. 3 new minority-owned businesses had opened on the same street. The neighborhood association had elected its first black president. People who had never spoken to each other became friends over coffee and conversation. Marcus's elite brew had struggled after the boycott and investigation. Faced with declining profits and a ruined reputation, he had been forced to sell. The new owner was a young Korean woman who specialized in fusion pastries and who had approached Maya about collaboration rather than competition. Sometimes the best victories are the ones that lift everyone up, Maya told a reporter from the local newspaper who was writing a feature story about community revitalization. The real measure of her success, though, wasn't in the numbers or the news stories. It was in moments like this morning, when little Sarah Martinez spilled chocolate milk on her school uniform, and Maya helped clean her up while Carlos finished his coffee and discussed weekend plans with Mrs. Johnson. Maya opened her grandmother's recipe book, now stained with daily use and love. On the last page, she had started writing her own recipes and stories, not just for food, but for community building, for standing up to bullying, for turning inherited dreams into living reality. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw the article about your cafe. I'm a young black man in Detroit who just inherited my grandfather's barbershop. Everyone says I should sell it. After reading your story, I think I'll fight for it instead. Thank you for showing the way. Marcus, the good one. Maya smiled and showed the message to Mrs. Johnson, who was arranging fresh flowers on the counter. Flowers that came from 3 different community gardens that had sprouted up in empty lots around the neighborhood. Looks like your grandmother's magic is spreading beyond these walls, Mrs. Johnson observed. Maya looked around her bustling cafe, at the faces of every age and background sharing space and stories, and felt the truth of those words. Her grandmother's dream hadn't just been about serving good food and coffee. It had been about proving that love is stronger than hatred, that community is stronger than division, and that one person's courage to stand up can inspire an entire neighborhood to stand together. As the lunch crowd began filtering in, Maya tied on her apron, the same one her grandmother had worn, and prepared to serve not just meals, but hope, because sometimes changing the world starts with changing your corner of it. One cup of coffee and one act of courage at a time. The sign in the window, hand-painted by a local artist, said it all. Grandma's Embrace, where everyone belongs. And they did. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories of people who refuse to give up. Which part of Maya's journey inspired you the most? Let us know in the comments below.